can see my. Ken, would you be so kind to speak to the image that we put together for the different ideas related to those different areas?
Sure. And these are really just ideas, and I think part of the question that we have for the city really is, there's swapping the land as an idea, which I think makes sense from just the nature of contiguous ownership here. But then beyond that, what are the possibilities within, fundamentally within the triangular piece that is on the developer's side of the bike path.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, at the moment, city owns that triangle. We talked about doing the Savannah restoration, not only for that triangle, but for the length of the bike path along, or for the property along the bike path, which makes sense from just sustainability and management of the grounds for the apartment complex, but also makes sense for demonstrating sustainable practices for the city's property. But then beyond that, there are opportunities for various levels of recreation, both within the parcel that the developer owns and potentially within the parcel, the triangular piece, given that it would be adjacent to other recreational type activities that would be happening within the project. So we just sort of shotgunned a bunch of ideas about what could happen there. We think the residents of this development could be relatively diverse in terms of age. So there might be, empty nester types who have grandchildren or visiting them on occasion. So having play facilities for kids makes sense at some level. Also, recreational facilities for adults, and again, part of the development, but also guests and because the bike path is right there, I mean, there might be opportunity for folks who are literally passing by to stop and rest or partake of some level of this activity.
Yeah, Ken, you're fading a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, it really comes down to, what might be possible, what might be allowed, what might the city want to do, whether this triangle is owned by the city or swapped over to the developer. And what we would do there, I think, is somewhat dependent upon, whose land we're doing it on, shall we say.
Well, is your thought that if you did these developments in area B, that would also have access to the public who come along the path?
It could certainly have that access. It would be hard to deny people on the bike path. It would feel as if that was part of the bike path experience. So I think, to the extent that would be available to folks on the bike path, I think that's, to make it unavailable would mean a barrier, which would not be what we'd want to do anyway. But like Matt said earlier, it's not like you could drive here, park, and get out and do something. It's not sort of that kind of access. Bike path, if you haven't been on it, is challenging, shall we say, from just the grade there. But
I understand that part of it. The concern that seems to me an obvious thing is if the city has a triangle of land that's flat enough it actually could develop some park things, why would it give that up when we need parks to give it to you and then make it private? I don't personally see the logic of that. I could see that doing the land swap if you're willing to develop this land, but essentially and say, instead of we can't stop people coming from it, maybe say that this is open to anybody on the path and nobody's going to make a big deal about it. Maybe you could comment.
Let me jump in because
Yeah.
most of this is my harebrained idea.
Okay.
Is in taking the entire piece of that property, with the exception of the city-owned piece, restoring the Oak Savanna that abuts the bike path.
Mhm.
You lost it on me there, Dwayne.
Is it
There you go.
there now?
There you go. Get constructing our improvements, and then the balance of the rest of that area where the grade is not as severe on our side of the bike path. I'll call it our side because area A is also ours.
Yeah.
Grade there is fairly severe. Creating something inside from the bike path to our building footprint that is a recreation area is our plan.
Okay.
The idea of discussing how to do that and what the city's appetite is for something like that, because it's not big, it's not a big area.
Yeah.
But that area right now is basically a wasteland. You ride through there on the bike path, and there's nothing going on there. I mean, the weeds have taken over. You hardly notice a whole lot going on, and you get past it. And with the pedestrian overpass going in here in this development and us cleaning up that hillside at a minimum, I think there's an opportunity for that to be a very engaging piece of property. It's not a big piece of property, but it can be very engaging. The question for me is, how do we do that collectively? But if it's something that this committee even has an interest in, because there's some work to do to figure it out. Does the land swap make any sense? Is it easier for us to control that little piece and do this? And then how do we create some access there that doesn't make my insurance company beat its head against the wall, and that we don't have any real resistance from this commission? So initially I thought having this discussion at first with Matt and with staff, and then with, since we saw the plan commission first and needed to be referred to you guys, is to present this concept to you guys and see if it has any legs. If it doesn't, that's okay. I mean, we'll go about our business and we'll restore the property and make some stuff for us, and that's okay too. But I just thought, because that improvement is already there, the bike path is there.
Right.
And we're going to have to clean up that hillside to make it presentable for us anyway.
Mhm.
I turned Ken loose and he came up with some really fun ideas of some things we can do that are engaging. And if people are coming along the bike path and they know that stuff's there and they want to stop and eat a protein bar, and their kid wants to go play on some of these, rustic areas, all the better. I think that's wonderful for our project. I think it's wonderful for the city, and I think it's wonderful for this direction of the bike path. But again, that's just my feeble idea, and we wanted to get some feedback from this body to see if it has any legs in your guys' opinion.
Well, yeah, and I guess to clarify a little better before I turn it to the commission, that was part of the intent, to see to what extent we knew the conversations were beginning, and they wanted to know to what extent we would engage or not. Matt, you have your hand up. And you're muted.
I want to make sure that we're talking about things that PRFC can discuss.
Mhm.
And so the land swap is not a PRFC discussion. That is a Conservancy lands discussion. I want to make sure everybody's clear on that. In terms of PRFC, the discussion items are you interested in requiring the developer to dedicate land to the city, or are you interested in allowing them to pay a fee in lieu of parkland dedication for their development? And I mean, that's really what PRFC has say in here. There isn't, the whole land swap thing really needs to be discussed by Conservancy Lands to determine if that is something that Conservancy Lands is interested in. And then if that goes through and there's interest in the developer talking with PRFC about, I know John's insurance questions and, how we make that, palpable on both sides.
Yeah,
But I think it's putting the cart before the horse in terms of Conservancy Lands weighing in. And so I think for the developer's benefit, as well as to ensure that we've reviewed this, is there, what is the thought on parkland dedication and how that would be handled on this project?
Let me just intercept for just a second, Matt. I think you need to make that clear to other members of the Plan Commission, because this was not how the discussion went. And they thought that we were the ones that had the purview and we were the ones in charge of dealing with this. So the referral to us came then by a misunderstanding, but that's why I'm going this way. I'm not trying to push against what the agenda, I'm pushing for what we thought on Plan Commission was what they wanted us to do.
Well, and to go further here, this is part of my and several other staff members' challenges with the multiple committee structure we have, because in any other community, you would be completely right, John. But we have this Conservancy Lands Committee, and we kind of cut them off at the pass by not allowing them to review and weigh in on this as they appropriately should.
I agree with you. I'm just telling you, it was a misunderstanding when it's happened. And so I don't want you to become jumping down on us like we're trying to push something through on you that's not right. I'm just, I'm learning in this process too. Let me open it up to other members just for comments. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
So I guess I go back to my original question, which is, I'm not sure then PRFC is ready to make a determination how we can move forward with dedication or fees in lieu and so forth, if we don't know if there's going to be a land swap or not, because that certainly makes things look different. So until that decision gets decided, I'm not sure what we have to talk about.
Okay, others?
I have a question. So let's say we did this land swap. So what does the city do with the land that they've acquired through the land swap?
Well, I think we can answer that partly in this committee of at least telling Matt that if this land swap were to take place, do we think this is an idea that's worth pursuing if and when that happens?
Well, it comes
Or
back
should we
to us.
tell them, Matt, say just give up the whole thing, we don't care?
Well, I think if Conservancy Lands finds value and interest in the land swap, then Conservancy Lands would need to determine what is done with the property that the city receives in return. And could there be direction to make that parkland? I'm sure there's a process there for that to happen, but it's this multitude of committees that kind of complicates a matter like this.
So moving forward, then we should maybe make a recommendation. Has this been put before CLC? Is it on their agenda? Has been referred to them at all?
It's been referred. It'll be on their next agenda.
All right.
And they'll have a meeting next week, is it?
Correct. Yes.
John, you have your hand up for just a second.
Yeah, I do. And I understand the complexities of the multi-committee. And one of the reasons we're before this committee, at least how I came out of Plan Commission, is if this doesn't have legs for Parks and Forestry, there's no point to going any further with it. I don't need to swap Area B for Area A for any other reason other than create a contiguous recreational area. And so I get that if we think that that's a great idea, we have to get through, we have another hurdle to jump. I got it. But to pursue that and mess around with it, if there aren't any legs to having this lower slope of this property, at least conceived of, and we're still, trying to conceive of it with input from this body for certain. We don't have to mess around with it anymore. So I don't think it's a chicken or an egg or a waste of time to, in my opinion, this committee has an awful lot to say about whether there's value to pursuing some level of restoration to this inboard chunk of property. Forget about the Area B piece.
Mm-hmm.
as a recreational piece of property, whether we own it, whether it gets, dedicated back to the city. That, I mean, those are all more, how it all gets paid for. Those are all hurdles that have to get jumped. But if the preponderance is that it's not worth even pursuing, that's an okay answer. But that's why I wanted to be here to make this point and see what everybody who sits on this committee thinks about the idea, because it's just our idea. I mean, it's, just an idea. And I don't think it hinges on whether we swap those two pieces of property. That just seemed logical to go down that road if this idea has legs.
Well, I can speak mostly for myself, but I'll speak from what I think this committee's talked about for all the years I've been on, is that the acquisition of land is much more important than getting money, because we need the space, we need land when possible. And certainly in my opinion, and I think reflects at least the majority of the committee, that ultimately the idea of trying to acquire land for a park is a desirable thing. So whether this be the land, sorry, excuse me, or whatever, and I think that we would look at you as a developer and say, we need to try to get some land. Others.
I agree with pretty much everything you say, John. My only question is, where would be a good place to put park if we were to be able to put it around here? And I kind of question whether we would be looking to put a park somewhere along a challenging bike path. That doesn't seem like some prime area for us. And I don't know if there is a good place for a park in this parcel. But I wholly agree with you that trying to get more land is very important, but we also need to have land that will work well for a park. And I don't know if we have that here.
Okay. Well, I offered that only in that saying it to me, that should keep the door open to having this discussion instead of closing it off.
Yes.
Other thoughts?
Is it also possible if we were allowing the developer to develop that as a recreational area, that if we made this flop or whatever, that it would be in the contract that, even though it belongs to them, that, they have no problem with, people on the bike path wanting to use it, being able to use it, somehow making it open to the public, I guess. If that were in the contract. I don't know if that's a possibility.
And just to weigh in there, the challenge with that, as John alluded to earlier, is his insurance company. The state grants governmental organizations recreational immunity that allows us to build parks and put playgrounds in and skate parks and trails. And it basically says that as long as we're not negligently maintaining them, that the city can't be sued. It's not that they can't be sued. It limits the damages one can collect.
It's a high threshold.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, there's barriers there. And I just want to add to what David said. I think land is really important. And we've seen that we're behind or we missed a 10-year window of land acquisition there to try and keep up with the growth of the community. And I think we have to be smart in our land acquisition. It has to be accessible, and the development, the challenge that I see here is us acquiring land and putting a park here. Even if it were accessible, does it serve a large enough audience to make it cost effective? And those are some of the challenges you run into on these small parcels as well. And I agree wholeheartedly that if we can find a win-win with what the developer plans to do and finding a way for public access to the improvements, that'd be the best case of both scenarios. I do see value in what John and his team have proposed in terms of the land swap, in that this area it's one of many properties we have on a wishful list of projects in terms of restoring and preserving. And here we have a developer who's interested in doing that. And I think that we've got to carefully weigh when the city theoretically could maintain this area the way it should be and take advantage of an opportunity here in a partnership to improve what's along this path from an aesthetic standpoint and from a conservation standpoint.
All right, well, I could go back to Dan, I guess. I think that this is not the conversation that we're prepared or should be having at this point. And whether that would mean tabling this or just simply offering no further advice is not really a motion item. This is getting input from the committee. And I think you've gotten some input from the committee and we hope it comes back. Being on Plan Commission, once we know something more, we'll be dealing with this again, I'm sure, but most likely. But any other comments or questions? So Dan, maybe you could help us with the
Well,
appropriate.
it's already been referred to CLC, so we'll just defer this item then until we have a determination from CLC. So I'll make that my motion.
All right, thank you. Do we have a second for that motion?
Second.
All right, thank you, David. Any discussion of the motion? All right, hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so motion is deferred. Thank you all for showing up and helping out. Moving to item number 2, support for the urban forestry grant application. Matt, I turn this to you. Matt,
That mute button gets me every time. Sorry.
just leave it off.
Hopefully hit it. I'm sorry, what's that?
Just leave it off and don't snore, You're leaving up.
Hopefully you had a chance to look at Mark's memo. Of note, and I think PRFC has been spared from some of this discussion to this point, but Dan Ramsey can fill you in if you wish. We have a pretty significant outbreak of spongy moth, which is the former gypsy moth in the Sackwoods, Parisi Park, kind of Park Street neighborhood. And staff is 100% supportive of the idea of aerial spraying to control that population. And so Mark is looking at submitting an urban forestry grant to assist with those costs, as well as an update to our tree inventory. And the gravel bare root nursery is kind of an interesting idea. It allows us to extend our planting season by putting it in at a relatively low cost. And it's one of these beneficial kind of maintenance things that we haven't been able to do, but it is well stated in a grant like this. So how we've structured our city budget request is that we show a $35,000 capital request so that we can do the spongy moth spray whether we receive the grant or not, with a $24,000 grant match, meaning that if we do get the grant, the amount of capital we requested, the 35, would actually reduce down to 24. So there'd be an $11,000 that could be given back, but we need to ensure that we have the money for the spongy moth spraying, if that makes sense. So we want to move this grant forward. It seems like a no-brainer to submit, and we're going to hope that Mark's successful in securing the grant.
I think Mark did a great job with this, and I'll go ahead and make a motion in support of this and getting this approved.
All right, do I have a second?
Ramsey will second.
Okay, Ramsey, thank you. Do you have anything to add, Dan?
This is a great idea for
Okay.
us to support this.
All right.
And I have a question.
Yeah, Erica.
What was updating the tree inventory? Is that just like counting the trees or?
So we have a graphic information system, GIS database of our trees, and what we want to make sure is that it's updated with everything with emerald ash borer and all the tree planting that was done as a result. We want to make sure that our street tree inventory and park tree inventory is updated in that GIS system. So it's, Mark can probably better speak to it. I'm not sure that it's going tree by tree, but it's probably spot checking and making sure that what we have in the system matches what's on the street.
And then if there are trees that like blew down and were never planted, are they going to like, write, oh, we have to plant a tree here?
Possibly. In most of those cases, those have been addressed. The challenge becomes in some instances where a tree comes down is that it's too close to the driveway apron and shouldn't have been planted originally. So sometimes we don't replace one for one, if that makes sense, because there's certain clearances we want from a driveway. And 30, 40, 60 years ago, they may have had a different thought then. And so we don't replace every tree for every tree, if that makes sense.
Okay, but then maybe like looking at empty spaces where there could be trees and noting that.
I can ask Mark if that is part of it.
Because I've seen a lot of empty areas that trees could be added to. It just looked like, something got cut down or.
And the other thing is we're always a year behind on that because we're accounting right now this year in our planting for next year of what we lost this year, if that makes sense, because we don't have trees sitting around. When a storm blows through in June and July, we've already planted the trees we ordered for the year. So then we fall a year behind on replacement, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Presumably you're not replacing with ash trees, is that?
No, we're not.
Okay. All right, any other discussion?
Is there any, I have a comment about some trees that are planted, like the ornamental trees they can look like, and for street trees, they just seem like they're too small. I don't know if anyone.
There's a lot of effort that goes into accounting for a diverse species of trees because we want to avoid an entire street of elm trees or an entire street of oak trees or an entire street of ash trees because I believe our entire canopy, Dan might remember as well, but I think it was like north of 22% of our street trees were ash trees. And so we're trying to get a greater diversity. And oftentimes Mark will present a list of the trees that we're planting each year and showing the diversity that we're introducing into the urban forest.
Eric, I know part of the thing with the small trees, talking Mark a number of years, power lines. And so they don't want to put a big tree underneath power lines where it's going to get chopped and split and V'd. So I know there's certain areas where there's entire blocks of small trees.
Yeah, I know. I understand that.
Yeah. So, and that's smart. As somebody who gets his trees chopped every 5 years, I think it's smart.
No, I know. I understand like that, some streets, it looks horrible and they cut them all down. It's really sad.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Hearing no further, call, the motion's been called and seconded. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to number 3, my favorite topic, asphalt maintenance.
So there was a lot of discussion of this at the last meeting and we worked.
Unfortunately couldn't be there for that one, right?
Well, no, you're fine. Don't expect everyone to be at every meeting.
No, especially when it's about asphalt.
So we've kind of put together this draft plan and kind of wanted some initial feedback. I'm going to start on the multi-use path and although PRFC doesn't have a lot of involvement, I think it's important that we start looking at some of this holistically instead of piecemeal. We've worked with Sean Alsrud, who is on our public works. He's one of the engineering techs and does a lot of the management of the city's public works asphalt. So street construction projects, he oversees the crack filling program for the streets and is kind of our resident expert on all things asphalt. So he went out and analyzed a lot of our trails with Mark Wagner and came back and said that, the things that were paved prior to 2018, a lot of it was porous asphalt. And so that kind of rules out the idea of crack filling to begin with. And that a lot of the older segments are so far gone, and his larger concern is that a lot of it appears to be very thin asphalt, like less than 2 inches or less than 1.5 inches of asphalt. And so therefore, in a lot of situations, it really doesn't make sense to crack fill, and it'd be a poor investment from the city's standpoint in what you'd be able to, extend the life of. So what we're really looking at is the sealant that they've been using on new streets, in applying that to the asphalt that we've paved since 2018, as it extends the life and provides a sealant to keeping water and moisture out to start those cracks. And then applying that sealant this year, we would also work with a geotechnical firm to start doing core samples of our existing trail network and develop a rating system or a ranking system that identifies the worst segments to put together a 5-year plan, very similar to what Public Works does with the streets in terms of a reconstruction plan for those trails. And that core sample analysis, the data will give us, do we need additional base, where pulverizing the existing asphalt and putting it down and using that as additional base, or are we okay to do an overlay on some segments, and really looking at that core data to help us formulate what the maintenance plan or the replacement plan is in the future for those trails. We've also not put together a long-term maintenance plan for tennis courts, as the focus has been in repairing. So here you see kind of in a haphazard order here on the tennis courts, the Stricker Park, which was done in 2019 as an insurance claim, we overlaid a membrane over the existing asphalt at Stricker, and the recommendation on a membrane system is that it needs to be recolored every 8 years. Asphalt, the recommendation is to year 3 to fill cracks at $1,000 per quart, year 6 at $1,500 per quart, and at year 8 you'd armor, which is a taping system on the cracks, and recoloring with a 4-quart system at $18,000 per quart. So I've kind of put those numbers into this chart, and we're going to talk about Lakeview later tonight and what that looks like moving forward. But that's kind of the layout on the tennis courts. One note that the Stonefield courts it's a synthetic polyurethane overlay that was done in a 2-year period of time. One of the courts was done in 2013. The following court was done in 2014. There is a recommendation to recolor those at an estimated cost of $30,000. So I put that out and tried to break this up, and we can adjust the order of how this goes. But and then moving on with the basketball courts, the Taylor was done in 2018. I didn't have time to dig back and try and find what years the courts were put in at the other locations. That is something that I'll continue to work on, finding that information. But I've put together kind of a plan here for the basketball courts as well. And then I've reflected these as an asphalt maintenance for basketball and tennis in the capital budget that we'll talk about next. So happy to answer any questions, clarify anything further, or curious on your thoughts. So
I have a question, Matt. When we look at sealing the trails, we are unencumbered in terms of adding height to the trails. One of the reasons the city does what it does in terms of roads is we have curbs on either side, and we can't build it up very much, but we could do a traditional chip seal, which is a much thicker layer on the trails if we wished. Has any thought been put into that?
I think That's something that core data will tell us too, because Sean's primary concern is that there's inadequate base under the path, and that's why we're seeing the amount of cracking and the issues that we're having. So
Yeah.
trying to determine whether we've got adequate base or not is part of that core sample data that's going to be critical to figure those things out.
Yeah.
And then, you know, one of my concerns, even with crack filling, has been the bike community and their reaction to it, because I had a very negative experience in another community once. And that would be my concern about chip seal as well, in terms of the bicycles and what their reaction would be to it initially over those first couple months, where it's going to be a lot rougher ride.
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. What was the negative reaction regarding the crack filling?
Well, let's just say the crack filling wasn't done real well.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
And a little too much material applied, and it created a, you know, almost a washboard effect on certain segments of the path. And then because there was too much material, when it would get hot, there'd be a little bit of melt and, you know, all kinds of fun there. But I think, again, if we were going to crack fill, we would utilize the city's, this public works contract, and add our square footage or tonnage or however it's calculated on to that already existing work. And that they, in addition to doing streets, we would add certain trail segments for crack filling. And what we want to make sure is, with the new asphalt that we've put down, that's at Lakeview and the North Mendota Trail, that we get kind of ahead of the curve on how we want to maintain those, so that we're preserving those moving forward and not creating some of these issues. We know we've got quality base and that they were installed correctly, and want to make sure that we're extending that life to the full extent that we can.
Okay. Other comments, discussion? Now, Matt, this is all being done by Public Works. Is that correct, or no? Whose purview are these tracks?
I think the plan now is that Parks and Recreation is going to take the lead on this, but where we can partner or add on with Public Works with things that they're doing already makes a lot of sense, in both, you know, avoiding additional mobilization costs, and you know, they will go out and solicit quotes for crack filling, and just being able to add our quantities or segments into what they're already doing makes it a more efficient and hopefully more cost-effective process.
Okay, but the presumption is that if they're going through our parks, they're our responsibility.
Correct.
Okay. All right. All right. Any other discussion? All right. Thank you, Matt. Having not been here last time, I'm not sure if everybody's got what they wanted, but I'm not hearing any conversation, so I presume so. As I said, it's a good plan. I think you've done a lot of work on it.
Well, this is needed, and it's one step, and we're going to hope to keep learning more and keep updating this, but trying to put something in application that we can follow and commit to. And the key is going to be the 5-year plan, and then trying to find a way to fund the 5-year plan, because that's where we've failed up until this point.
Well, that's where the partnership with Public Works comes in. You're gonna have to work real close with Public Works. Parks and Road Department will obviously have to be the one to take the lead as to where and when and what goes, but it's gonna be very important to work with Public Works to keep those costs down.
The other thing is that we've talked a little bit about is Public Works does have their own paver, and it's the perfect width for our paths. But the challenge is for them to free up a crew to do path work. You know, we're gonna results into horse trading with responsibilities and things, but it could be another option as we look at how to address some of this moving forward. And I think it's important to note, the challenge also becomes that they pave like 2 weeks out of the year, whereas a professional asphalt crew, that's what they do, 40 to 50 hours, probably 60 hours a week. all summer long. And so the quality and there may be other challenges with it, but it's another option of what we can look at moving forward and how we address this.
All right. Well, it sounds like a good plan to me, and Matt, you've been good at all of these things over the years. So I have a lot of great faith in that you'll get something good out of this. We're better than bad. Let's put it that way. All right. If there's no further discussion, let's move on to item number 4, the 2023 capital budget and the Lakeview tennis courts.
Yeah, if it's okay with you, I think it may be good to start this discussion with the Lakeview tennis court issue. And
I just presume they're related since they're on the same.
yeah, I apologize as something didn't get added in here, and I'm going to take a minute to try and find that.
Okay.
Because I think it's important to our discussion. I'll start by building some time here and just to highlight the challenge that we're presented from a staffing standpoint right now in the loss of Rebecca Price, who I'm really excited for her and the opportunity that she's going to have with Madison College and getting to teach full time and not having to run a pool in the summer months. But it is, we're going to be hard pressed to, we're not going to replace Rebecca in terms of experience or anything along those lines. And there's a shortage right now of qualified aquatic professionals to begin with. So I'm cautiously optimistic, and I'm bracing myself that we will be hiring for skills and not necessarily the experience that we would hope for in this current hiring market, if that makes any sense.
Well, it does, and then your plan just morphs based on the people you have.
Yeah, you just don't want me having to run a pool, John. That's that's my
You're good.
primary concern.
Yeah, but you got the splash pad thing down. Good at that one.
So what I've pulled up on the screen, can you see this kind of green and yellow document?
Yep.
All right, so this is the latest projection from Fred Kolkman. Fred is recognized as the tennis court expert in the state of Wisconsin. He works with all of the tennis contractors in terms of when he puts specs and bids out. He does good work, and we've had really good success in working with him on the projects he's been involved in. And I'll point out the one project we've done in my time that he wasn't involved in, we've had some challenges with the court surface there at Taylor. So the important thing to point out is the asphalt reconstruction cost of the 4 courts at Lakeview is now estimated at $450,000. A year ago at this time, it was estimated at $300,000, which is giving me pause, because we are not going to get $450,000 in the capital budget to replace those courts. Dan, maybe you have a different thought, but we've never gotten that level of money for a park project from the capital budget. And so it's making me wonder if we don't, so the full coverage Pro Extreme at 265, that is a membrane overlay. Very similar to what we did at Stricker. We've had really good results and response from the courts at Stricker. The tile system that is the cheapest, that is, if you're familiar with Sport Court, it's an interlocking tile that's placed over the existing. They'll smooth out and maybe do some crack filling on the existing asphalt surface, but it's basically a tile, interconnected tiles. They're popular with basketball courts. The challenge with a tennis setup is it's even more slippery when it does get wet. It takes longer to dry. You can't squeegee it off the same way you squeegee off a asphalt court or even the membrane overlay. The Nova Pro Bounce is another membrane overlay. It's just a higher level of product. But he said that the Full Coverage Pro Extreme is very comparable to the product that we used at Stricker. You can see there in terms of warranty, asphalt will only come with the asphalt company's warranty, and it's usually a year to 2 years that they'll stand behind their product before it cracks. Whereas you can see the tile comes with a 10-year, and the Pro Extreme and the Nova Pro Bounce each come with a 5-year warranty. And then, the membrane requires a recoloring at 8 years, whereas asphalt has the 2-year, the 6-year, and the 8-year maintenance that we talked about earlier. So along with this, I'd always envisioned an expansion at Lakeview. And granted, any expansion would result in being able to use park development funds, but the reconstruction is not eligible for park development funds. And if we want to look at the expansion, I can ask for, I haven't had a chance to talk to Fred about what an expansion would look like if we went with the membrane system. Could you still do an expansion of asphalt, 2 additional asphalt courts, and color them like you do asphalt, and then have a plan to go to a membrane down the road? Does that cause any issues, or is that a viable alternative? But my first kind of concern here was trying to address how we move forward on these courts.
Yeah, the idea, we had a conversation about adding 2 more that came with great pain and talking about the costs and how you would lay them out and all kinds of other issues. And I think that given budgets and constraints right now, the thought of talking about 2 more should be low on the priority list. But
The
certainly,
only counter I would say to that, John, is if we can adding two courts would allow us, I believe, to do 3 pickleball courts. And based on the amount of interest that we're getting in pickleball and demand for pickleball, I have folks at Stricker and Stonefield wanting us to recolor both of those courts and add in pickleball lines. And then you get into the pickleball versus tennis fight. Being that Lakeview is centrally located, if we're able to do this and it makes sense, the first priority is we've got to get those 4 existing courts taken care of.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And then because we can use park development fund for addition, if there's a way to make it work and we could add some pickleball courts there, I think it's a win. But we've got to get the maintenance issue figured out first.
Well, you were talking about compatibility with future, and it seems to me that every court is its own unique entity, and putting 2 side by side, I don't necessarily see that to be a huge complication with trying to make them match, because you're not playing across courts as you're doing anything. So anyway. All right, comments, questions?
I just have a question on the tile system, because I'm not really familiar with that, but that one seems to have the best warranty, a 10-year warranty.
The challenge is people hate playing on them. It's the easiest thing I can say about it is it's an option. It's not a great option. I'm trying to pull up. I don't know if you guys can see my browser, but this is what that ends up being. It allows water to go through, but in terms of the bounce you get of the ball and playability, can you see my screen?
No, it can't.
Okay, let me reshare.
It strikes me it would be better for something with big balls and not a lot of action on the ground. A volleyball court or something.
So these are all examples of sport court. Yeah. They're very popular for like these large 3-on-3 tournaments where they come down and throw down a basketball court, or they're popular with volleyball. With tennis, it's been an economical solution, but you can see here, I Googled sport court and everything coming up is, you know, for them, it looks like it's all basketball.
Yeah.
Well, and that's fine. I just wasn't familiar with the product. For my level of tennis expertise, it would probably be fine, but anybody who plays on any kind of regular basis.
Well, and part of that is what gives me cause for concern on the membrane system, because it's not going to play the exact same as asphalt, but at the same point, you know, the highest level of play that these courts see is, you know, the JV tennis team uses them, and I'm not sure that that can be a limiting factor for our budgetary issues.
No, because at some point we have to look at the budget that we have and what we can, and you know, obviously the asphalt reconstruction is the Cadillac, but I'm not sure in this environment we're going to buy a Cadillac. So you know, I think we're fine with the Oldsmobile at $265,000.
Yeah, and I think as Matt says, we've used this product and you've had good luck with it. And people don't like the other products. I'm not sure that extra warranty in and of itself should be a real driving factor, but I'm comfortable with the, you know, the Pro Extreme bit and doing that. You know, I think it's a compromise, but I think it's a good one.
I think it's, from my perspective and what I've seen with the capital budget, it's our only way forward to do something in 2023.
Okay. Well, so are you looking for the motion or just getting input on that?
I think that at the end of the day, as we review the full capital budget, you could make a recommendation to move that forward with this change of looking at this $265,000 product as opposed to the $450,000 solution.
Okay. All right.
And
So,
I'm gonna
so Matt,
pull-
are there courts that have the Pro Extreme currently?
So this is a newer version of what we have currently at Stricker.
So the closest one would be Stricker that, okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
I guess
But you
I'm one, I just need to see it to, or even stand on it. You know, I can look at pictures and,
Yeah.
but
Go for it. Well, we'll wait. Just yeah, no, that's fine. And Matt, you said it's done okay with what's there. You've had good luck with it so far.
Yeah, and again, just for those that are new to the budget process, I turn the budget in the end of this week.
Mhm.
There is still a lot of time. I believe that the budget, the Parks and Recreation budget, fingers crossed, goes to the Finance Committee on September 29th. So we'll have another meeting that we can kind of further discuss. You'll also at our next meeting get your chance to kick the can on the operating budget, although there's, you know, very little that we get to change in the operating budget. I wish that was different, but reality is that one doesn't change a whole lot from year to year.
Okay.
So
All right,
I'll go through.
Yeah, go on with the budget now, and then we'll make a motion.
Yep. So I think we've gotten through the first two items. Item 3 is the Penny Klein project, the ADA compliance project. The path work and the berm. We've looked at it, and I think that the number that we've come comfortable with in terms of what we would need for both tree acquisition as well as labor and things that we wouldn't be able to do in-house. We came up with a number of $75,000 for. The Lake Street boat launch improvements, this is a guess in terms of cost because we're just starting that discussion, but I wanted a placeholder here so that we could move forward with that work next year. So this is a number that is likely to get updated as we go through that process. It's also to say that this could be a phased improvement. The playground replacement program, those are plugging the numbers in from that program that we've had. And I see I've got a spelling error that I need to correct there. The athletic court maintenance program, that's the asphalt, the basketball and tennis court maintenance that we've talked about. All Abilities Playground is something that we've referenced a little bit, but if you're familiar with these are popular in a lot of communities. We do not have one. They're built on an inclusive play goal where those with a disability or even parents with a disability, there aren't barriers to everyone being able to play on those. Excuse me. The Parisi Park shelter is a replacement and improvement of the existing shelter there. We would use 2023 as a planning year to design, with 2024 as construction. Lakeview East, this again is another placeholder for current design work. For those that aren't aware or I haven't shared with yet, we are having a kickoff meeting on August 29th at Lakeview Park at 5:30 p.m. for both the Lake Street boat launch and Lakeview East Park conceptual planning that we've hired Parkitecture to do that work. Taylor Park parking lot, I pushed off as far out into the 5-year plan as it can in 2027. I've left on the Henricks Family Farm Park basketball court request that I know was not well thought of at maybe the last meeting, but know that there's a couple people expecting to see it on the request list and wanted to leave it there. Parkside Heights Path and Orchid Heights Path are two of the path networks that I know are in the worst shape with the park system. What we'll have to do with part of that further asphalt work is determine, are those our two greatest needs or are there others? But I put them on as placeholders for future years for now. Happy to answer any further questions there.
All right. Comments, questions, concerns? Joan, I like your ceiling fan out there. Oh, there you go. Okay, I couldn't see it. I saw the top of your head in the light. I'm sorry.
Does the Parisi Park shelter include the bathroom that you were talking about?
Yeah, that would be a major component of that project. For those not familiar with that shelter, the bathrooms are in the middle of the building, and then there's overhangs on each side. The overhang areas allow 2 to 3 picnic tables on each side of that shelter. There's some ADA compliance issues with the restrooms, as well as they're not, as I've said before, the parks crew, if they had a dream that one would catch fire and they wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. But I think it's an opportunity to better serve the creek corridor, as well as that having a better, more rentable shelter at that space. We are turning away shelter requests on a daily basis. We are fielding calls, people looking for shelter reservations, and we just, and maybe that's not a concern, but we have more inquiries for park shelters than we currently can accommodate.
Well, and newer shelters we built have the bathroom on one end typically, don't they? And for the last, I mean, it gives you one larger potential, one larger as opposed to a small
The
place.
shelter space at Parisi is not functional for any kind of reservation or family gathering.
Okay. All right. Other questions, comments? I think it's good you put off the parking lot issue. It's right now, it's better than most of the streets in Middleton. So I think that's it's got a ways to go. Okay. Other comments?
As far as forestry, do they just like have anything on the budget, like for like, so much towards planting trees or improving parks with flowers, or I don't know?
Tree planting is viewed as an operating expense and not a capital expense. So that's they have funding in the operating budget. That's been a point of contention, but
so like
Dan, maybe
they
Dan,
get
maybe
the
this is
money.
the year that forestry that we could move tree planting to the capital potentially.
You know, everything's open for discussion. It's gonna be that
A
kind
lot
of,
of the floral, the flowers and those type of things. So the hanging baskets that are downtown and the downtown flower plantings are all included in the CDA's budget and are managed that way. We assist the CDA and planning staff in the maintenance of those, and currently are contracted to Bruce Company to maintain the downtown plantings. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not, Erica.
And it says forestry, so I would so it's just the spongy moth that's part of the forestry on this.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else?
The only thought I have is, going back to the park shelter, since that seems to be something that is in high demand for the community, that might be something we might want to, concentrate on in the future. Making sure that we have plenty.
Well, I'd add that, in 2018, we added Taylor Park. In 2020, we did Lakeview Park. 2024, this plan would have us doing Parisi Park.
Okay.
It has been a priority. But I understand your comment, Joan, is looking at more. And I think the question beyond Parisi is, what is that next park shelter? There's been some discussion about firemen's, but firemen's is its own problem. And that, the next shelter may be at one of the new park sites, whether that's the Bell Farm development, whether that's the Bruce Company project. And a lot of that's going to be dependent on the timeline that those development projects move forward.
and some of those will be park development funds, obviously, but if you want to look at existing parks, and I've bet your ear on this before, but you have the Orchid Heights Park, which is considered a community park that does not have bathrooms. And it has, I would say, a marginal shelter. So, there's plenty of opportunities.
So
in
I
existing-
have Matt Fleming, the Assistant City Attorney, 100% convinced that Parisi Park is eligible for 100% park development funding for the park shelter.
It's right dead center in the city, equal distance for every person.
Or
Or we'll move it if.
And here's the issue that we're going to run into Orchid Heights, that there may be an argument for partial funding from the park development fund, but one of the fundamental questions that Matt Fleming asked me is, will you be tearing down the Parisi Park shelter? Is there anything salvageable there? And I said, outside of the utility pipes underground, no. And that was part of and so maybe that applies at Orchid Heights too, because I'm not sure there's much there that we'd be salvaging.
I'm not sure there's much there worth saving either.
Right. Yeah, I guess the other obvious thing, Joan, of course, you look at these shelters, about the most expensive things we do. And so whether we want them or not, I mean, that eats up a huge amount of budget every time we put one of those in, because we're $5,000 to $7,000 a piece on that stuff. All right.
And I'm concerned with sticker shock on what Parisi in 2024 might be too. I just, the way tennis courts have escalated and pricing we're seeing on everything, it's cause for concern, and hopefully things come back down, but rarely happens.
They never come down as fast as they went up.
Mhm. Okay. Anything else? Well, looking for a motion to approve this or to support it, Matt?
Motion of support, and then if whoever makes the motion wants to include something about Lakeview and the adjustment there.
All right. Who would like to make a motion? I'll jump on it. Well, I'll make the motion just as Matt suggested, including the part about the Lakeview Park
So that goes down to 265, is that right?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll second that motion.
all right, David, we have a second. All right, discussion of the motion. All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion is carried. Thank you all. I think that is the end of our agenda. And
It is one quick note that our
Sure.
next meeting would fall on Labor Day. So
Okay.
we traditionally skip the first meeting in September, and
all right,
we'll see you on the third Monday in September.
that sounds good. And we trust that if you need us sooner, we'll be there.
Appreciate
All
it.
right.
Thanks, John.
Thank you all. I
Thanks.
need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Move, second.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed. All right, have a good month. We'll see you all in September.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.